Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we're talking about If Beale Street Could Talk, which everyone's been looking forward to.
Yes.
We were looking forward to it. It's written for the screen and directed by Barry Jenkins of Moonlight fame.
Yes.
Which won the Oscar just a couple of years ago.
Yes, from Moonlight.
Snatched it from under La La Land's nose. And it's based on the novel of the same name by James Baldwin, a great African-American intellectual and writer, and novelist and debater and all sorts from the mid-20th century.
That's right.
It's about this young girl called Tish, who's 18 years old, 19, and her boyfriend, Fonny, or Alonzo. They're played by KiKi Layne and Stephan James. They're very much in love. The film opens beautifully with them together, and he is revealed to be in jail on accusation of rape of a Puerto Rican woman. Tish reveals to him that she's pregnant, so a kind of multi-stranded plot develops with her on the outside of prison trying to cope with the stress of him being in jail, the case that they're trying to track down the woman because they think there's no way he could have done it, so they're trying to prove that.
Well, they know there's no way he could have done it.
They know there's no way he could have done it.
She was with him, and
right,
a friend was with him,
they think the woman has been coached or kind of talked into or just convinced into saying that he did it when there's no way he could have. There's a cop who has got something in for him, so there's the pregnancy. There's the way the two families kind of cope with the news, and there's just an incredible kind of heartfelt sense of drama and romance behind everything, and humanity. There's essentially two plot strands that are set up. So there's the kind of main plot, which happens in quote unquote the present day. This is in Harlem in the early 70s, late 60s.
Yeah, I would have said like late 60s, early 70s. Yeah. The novel came out in 74, I think. Okay,
so this is when it's set. And so you've got the main plot which deals with that, which is while Alonzo is in jail, and they're trying to track down this woman and deal with the pregnancy in this. But then it also jumps into flashback a number of times, where you see the two of them falling in love and their relationship developing, and
you see them as children. And,
they've known each other since they were very, very, very young kids. But then it becomes them falling in love and getting a place together and things like this. And so there's a kind of logic in the way the two stories are told, because they're both told chronologically in their own way, but the way they're edited, the way the film jumps back and forth between them, when it chooses to and where exactly it chooses to jump to, is really intuitive. There's kind of there's an instinctive quality to that, I think.
Yes.
There's something Terrence Malick about it, I think.
Well, I thought it was too self-consciously poetic. I mean, I think, the film is aiming for a kind of poetry, really. And in many ways it succeeds. But I also find it a bit stiff. Yeah.
Really?
I do.
I thought there was an unbelievable depth of feelings with the entire thing, and I was just in love with it throughout.
I was too, but there were some moments where you just feel that it feels kind of contrived, really.
I can understand what you mean about it feeling kind of self-consciously poetic. There are shots of, for instance, Alonzo's sculpture. He's a sculptor and he makes things out of wood. And there are these points where the camera kind of tracks around this sculpture in 360 degrees and just very, very slowly. And it just focuses on this thing for a long time. And then another shot will kind of fade in over the top. And I can see what you mean about that kind of... It might be trying to get at something that it doesn't quite reach, maybe.
When I was looking... When the film opens with this wonderful phrase of Baldwin's, where he says something like, "There's a Beale Street in every city in America." It's the black neighborhood, and then it says something like, "Where lives are lived to the sound of the drums or something like that.
Yeah, it started with explaining that Beale Street is a real street in New Orleans.
Yes.
And then it says, but Beale Street really speaks for every black place in America.
Right.
The black experience in America, really.
Right. But what I was getting at was that phrase about the drums.
Yes.
You know, because I thought, you know, this is a film that has no drums in it. It has violins, right? And it has saxes.
Yeah,
and it has sadness, right? But it doesn't have the anger, you know. So I think what Baldwin is arguably the most important writer in my life. I mean, I came to him as a teenager, you know, and he's kind of someone who means a lot to me, and I can recite phrases, you know, from some of his novels and essays still. And there was always kind of, I mean, the thing about Baldwin's prose is it's always on the verge of excess, right? It's almost like biblical writing, right? You know, kind of really beautiful and controlled, but almost kind of on the verge of, going purple, So, and part of that, I think what the two things that to me kind of describe it is a sense of anger, you know, at injustice, really. And on the other hand, like a kind of an immense amount of love, you know. So it's kind of like this anger is kind of enveloped and seeped through and, you know, kind of made manageable by love. And I think what this film has, it has the love, but it transmutes the anger into sadness, which I think is kind of disempowering.
I know what you mean, and I think that what you point out about the opening text that starts the film off doesn't quite match what you see in the rest of the film, really.
Yes.
And I think there's something almost kind of, and this would come from the original novel as well, there's something kind of presumptuous about the phrase, if Beale Street could talk, with Beale Street kind of standing in for the black experience as a whole, because it's sort of trying to say, this speaks for an entirety of black American experience, which it kind of can't. Nonetheless, there is a sort of...
it tries to, though.
Yeah, and you're right, that the lack of anger is an omission, in a way. But I think it's a little reductive to say that it just turns into sadness. I think it's more... I think there's a kind of coping that you see.
You do see that.
As opposed to just being sad, like they're trying to work through their problems, and there's a resistance to the structures that have put them where they are, that have created the problems.
Well, what you see very clearly in the film is everybody coping, in one way or another, right? Either through religion or theft, or, you know, kind of everybody is trying to manage the world as, you know, that they find that's kind of not of their own making. And the film is very careful about kind of showing you structures, right? So it kind of, you know, in some scenes you have photographs of, you know, other similar injustices that have happened, you know, historically. Sometimes it brings people within the narrative into history. So, you know, when you see the woman who's being raped, you originally see her in the same type of photograph, you know, as you see kind of men being arrested or men in jail, or so it puts her into history in a way. So all of that I thought, you know, was very beautiful. I mean, you know, there were things I was very moved by it, don't get me wrong, and there were some things where I almost just kind of gasped, really, that were so beautiful, you know. So at the very opening shots of the film, when you see the young couple coming into view, right, and they were just so beautiful, really, and the beauty was in the skin. Yeah, there was something about the way that they were lit and that they were dressed, you know, and they were just beautiful.
I think you can tell by the way that Barry Jenkins films faces that he loves people somehow. There's detail and time taken to look at every part of someone's face, just these beautiful shallow focus close-ups.
Yes.
You sit right up close and you have time to just... And they look right at you, you know, they look into the lens or just past it.
I think that's right. But there were other things that I didn't feel were as successful. So, for example, I thought a lot of the scenes with the family, you know, there were moments that were quite stilted. I thought, you know, the mother-in-law, which is one of the most vivid memories of my reading the book, in the 70s, was kind of stilted, really. I think there's a real self-conscious attempt to be poetic, and there isn't the freedom or liveliness or control to just let it flow yet, right? Everything is kind of too controlled, too purposeful, right? Like kind of, and in a way that I think kind of, for me, worked against the film. And that, I'm saying it, again, I feel like I did with Moonlight. There's so much I admire, there's so much I love about it, but kind of there are things that to me just don't feel quite right, really. I thought, for example, the whole scene where they go, and they're trying to rent the loft, right, and they've been turned down by everybody, and they're confronting all this racism and just renting a flat, and then this nice Jewish man lets it to them, and they do this playhouse thing. You could see what the director was intending with that, kind of, something kind of charming and magical and loving, and almost something out of a romantic comedy, but like a fairy tale, right? You could see the intent behind that, but it wasn't realized. Like, you saw the self-conscious attempt at kind of evoking that.
It worked for me. I gotta say, what you're saying about it kind of not flowing. That's just not how I felt. I felt it flowed really beautifully, and like what I said about when it chooses to go back into the flashback and then come back into the present day, and where it chooses to go to. Exactly.
So that aspect worked.
It flows really beautifully.
Okay, that aspect worked well up to a point. So actually, I think structurally, I liked all of that. I liked, the interconnecting but parallel structure of the narrative. I think it worked very well. I didn't like the amount of voiceover.
I actually really loved the voiceover.
Well,
I know you're not supposed to.
I think what you loved was probably, Baldwin's phrases in the voiceover.
They're great. It's beautiful.
They're great.
Phrasing, and it's beautifully written.
But they're not beautifully read. And I just didn't
I'm not sure
like.
I agree with that.
Okay.
What I really love, it's narrated by Tish, the girl.
Yes.
And
I found her reading of that quite stilted.
I didn't find it stilted. I guess it might have been better, but what I loved was that. I didn't question it for a second, and particularly when she's narrating in the flashbacks and when they're really in the throes of love. It's partly the narration and it's partly the way it's shot as well, and partly just partly the writing and actually what happens that you can feel completely why she loves and desires him.
Sure.
I fell in love with the guy almost.
I have things to say about that, and particularly in comparison to Moonlight, because actually it seems that Barry Jenkins can only film, kind of a man as an object of desire, and there's almost like a homosexual gaze in this film where, there's an alibi of heterosexuality, that permits him to look at, his protagonist kind of with all the love and desire and feeling that he didn't permit in the last sequence of Moonlight.
That's an interesting point. Because I know you have problems with the end of Moonlight, with that in that regard, and you're right. There is a way that Alonso is shot in this as an object of desire that nobody else is. But I think it is getting into Tish's head. You understand completely why she desires him. I'm thinking particularly of the first scene that you see with Diego Luna, the restaurant owner, and also they're very much in love in the restaurant, and the way that she looks at him, kind of admiringly and longingly, and that's kind of when she isn't that basically their first date or so, because that's when he invites her back to his place. So that's kind of where their relationship turns from a friendship into a romantic relationship. And I wanted to cry in that scene. I thought it was beautiful.
Yes, I think.
And it's about how she looks at him and the way he holds her hand and that sort of thing.
Well, I think all of that was beautiful.
And I didn't mind it being spelled out through the narration, partly because the narration is so beautifully written, as you say. I didn't mind how it was read, and that's, I guess, just a difference between us. And I just don't mind that kind of being spelled out sometimes. Like, sometimes it's nice, it's just to hear her telling her story of why she loves him.
I think it's very nice to see, a black man being filmed as beautiful, and to have that look on it be filtered, you know, not only through desire, but a kind of love. So it's not just this fetishization or something, it is kind of infused with feeling. And I thought that was very lovely to see. So that aspect I liked very much. I liked some of the interplay, you know, the interplay between the two fathers was just lovely. I loved Regina King. She had like kind of a fierce honesty, really, that comes across, that's just beautiful. So all of that I liked. I didn't like the central performance by
the one of Tish.
Yeah.
KiKi Layne.
Yeah. I thought it was too...
She's a little
mannered.
blank.
Yeah, and kind of still stiff, really. So, and actually it was very interesting, because as soon as, was it
Brian Tyree Henry.
Brian Tyree Henry appears, is... Again, he gives he sends the film into the stratosphere. It's like you feel, you know, here is this person, you know, kind of lighting up the screen with feeling, rather than, you know, all these kind of stiff, self-conscious gazes and long. Yeah, it's kind of, it feels like something human explodes, you know, as soon as he appears.
His to me is the best performance in the film.
Yes,
by some distance. He's got one of the meatier roles, I would say, even though it's a supporting role that he shows up for basically a scene. But he's an old friend of Alonso's, and he shows up at his place, or bumps into him in the street, and they come back for a few drinks, and while they're drinking and chatting and joking, he then reveals that he's been in prison for 2 years for something that he didn't do, stealing a car. He says, "I don't even know how to drive," and then he talks about what he's gone through in prison, or doesn't talk about it in any detail, but he talks. It's clear that his experience has changed him, and affected him quite deeply. And just that scene of the two men talking, there's something about just watching people talking, you know, like it's the most cinematic thing in a way. Like ultimately, every film has to come down to it at some point, just two people having a chat. And how do you film it, and how does it feel? And you know, the way it's shot is with these kind of singles that pan across from one character back to the other very slowly, and it just or if the characters are in a two shot, it'll be one will be in the background and one will be in the foreground, and then they'll rack focus between the two at just the right time. They're beautifully shot to kind of direct your attention, and Brian Tyree Henry is again so full of feeling and emotional honesty and transparency.
He's fantastic.
He's amazing.
And also, I also very much liked Ed Skrein. Yeah, he plays this cop who initially kind of threatens Alonso, and who later seems to be involved in the rape. It's the same cop, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think it's slightly subtextual or off screen, but basically there's an altercation in a grocery store where this guy comes on to Tish quite heavily, and Alonso throws him off and throws him into the street, into a pile of rubbish. The cop comes up, sees, you know, and then basically, because of this slight argument that goes on between the two of them, that and also that he's basically a racist cop whose authority is being questioned, Alonso has a target on his back. So then, you know, what happens off screen, because you don't see any of the incident, the rape that leads to Alonso being jailed, but clearly he's been included in the lineup.
Yes,
because this cop
put him there.
Yeah, basically put him there,
anyway,
in the lineup. And
the case about the rape is made to seem a complete injustice, right? So, you know, they explain how it just could not possibly have happened, right? So that, and it's important that be clear, right? Because kind of one of the things the film is doing is just kind of showing systematic racism in all its aspects. And one of the things about that scene in particular, it ties into a whole theme that Baldwin has, which is, you know, kind of that black men in America are not allowed to be men. That just like the basic things, you know, that men are expected to do, like get a job, you know, protect their family, blah, blah, you know, kind of they can't do. So that whole scene then becomes about him being angry at her because she's protecting him, that, yeah, kind of in the face of the law, he's rendered helpless, you know. So, and I thought that was great, actually. I thought that was very beautifully filmed, and Ed Scrine is filmed through kind of what looks like a slightly out of focus camera in quite large close-ups, right? And he's really menacing.
He's got this terribly angular face.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all,
So that sense of menace and so on is kind of rendered very beautifully, I think, in the film. There are many things that I loved, actually. So, kind of that last visit in the jail, where actually, that Alonso's going to lose just because almost he dissolves from view in jail, right? So I kind of, rather than cut onto the next scene, there's kind of like this wavy dissolve of just, of his torso. It is, it does strive for the poetic, and it does succeed. But it lacks a kind of a aliveness and a fluidity.
I think that the kind of striving for the poetic is, it can be a bit misleading just because I think what that phrase makes you think of is kind of hidden meanings or like encoded meanings. I think what it's really about is feeling your way through images. And that I think is what the film is really, really good at. And
I think what I'm saying as being like striving for the poetic is, of course, a condensation of feeling. That is what poetry does.
Yeah.
I don't, but I also think you need to be able to understand that that's what that is. That a dissolve of him in jail actually means something. To me, the two are one and the same. But obviously, kind of, the intent is to kind of evoke feeling, for sure.
Yeah.
And it does that, the film. But I do think it's very self-conscious. There's a purpose behind each choice, right? Which is a good thing. But it's making you aware that there's a purpose behind this choice, which for me is not a good thing.
Agree to disagree.
Well, that's fine. I'm glad you like it more.
Honestly, a film like this, absolutely has the potential to feel just interminable to me. So often they can, and that's just not where I went with this at all. I felt like I got its tempo immediately. And
I think we might not be as far off as you're making out, because I was very moved throughout, and I found much of it very beautiful, in fact, and certainly the cinematographer deserves a prize. I mean, it's a very beautifully shot film. So all of that I kind of I liked very much. I just feel that it's stiff.
Do you prefer it to Moonlight?
Well, I do prefer it to Moonlight, actually, because I think for me in Moonlight there was a big lie at the end of it, so, and I don't think there's any of that here, right? So, I mean, the whole thing about Moonlight, about this young man who's a pimp and, blah, blah, and, who's still a virgin and, in his mid-20s, I just couldn't believe a second of that. And I thought it was a cop-out. It was an unwillingness to kind of show gay men in the same way that he's showing, he could have showed exactly the same thing that he shows this young straight couple doing in this film, and it would have been beautiful. But, kind of nothing. So I thought, to me, that spoke of fear. The film kind of was being praised for being brave and, and so on. And actually, I thought that was cowardly to not provide that in the final scene of Moonlighting. It's certainly kind of very much on display here in a very beautiful way, which is lovely to see.
I prefer this to Moonlight as well, although I haven't seen Moonlight since it came out. And I remember finding the last third of Moonlight essentially dull. It wasn't until you brought up your issues with the end of it that I decided I would share those. Because I hadn't really thought about that. But I remember the first two sections of that film enjoying enormously and thinking they were brilliant.
Yes.
So I must go back and watch that again.
Yes.
But this throughout just captured me. It reminded me of Widows in some ways, particularly the structure, the flashback.
Oh, that's interesting.
Jumping to the flashbacks, because Widows does a similar thing.
Okay. I can see the comparison to Widows, because for me, both films are films by kind of real filmmakers. And actually, as you know, my feeling is that film, it works at its best as a poetic medium.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it's got 90 minutes to 2 hours, and it's creating a world, and it's telling a story, and it's commenting on a world and a story, and it's got to condense everything that it does, right, to evoke it. So, and this, both Widows and this film clearly do that, and they know how to do it, right, like, kind of, they're the real filmmakers, and kind of real poets of imagery, really. I know this is going to turn off probably the few people that are listening to us, but, because you hear poetry in cinema and people flee, right? But actually...
That's what it is.
That's what it is, and that's where it's at its greatest. And kind of very, very few... we were talking the other day about Green Book. Well, that wouldn't know poetry if it bit it in the ass. It hardly knows that film is a visual medium. All of the comedy comes from kind of character and situation and dialogue, right? Like kind of you.
And actually, that's the success of this film in a way, because it comes from a book and from such an acclaimed writer, and because the writing is so beautiful when it comes through in this film, when it is used kind of directly, and because there is so much that is dialogue heavy in this film, I think it's a huge. Kind of success, or it's hugely kind of praiseworthy that it is so kind of beautifully put together as a visual piece of work. It could be just so writerly and stayed.
Yes.
And I know what you're saying. I accept what you're saying about it being about you feeling that it's stiff here and there, but it could have been. I mean. Imagine if Peter Farrelly had directed it.
Yes, exactly. No.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
Exactly.
kind of, I want to underline that, that I was very moved through much of it, and it is very beautiful, and it has very beautiful moments, actually, some things, that I think I'll remember for quite a while. So, I'm not dismissing it. It's not a kind of a piece of crap cinema. It's like moonlighting, to me, in a way. Moonlight, in the sense that they're almost great works, but to me there's something lacking in both of them.
Yeah.
Okay. That it's not quite there, really. So, so that's kind of a different perspective on it. I can see why people are praising it. I understand. And yet I think there are some elements that I wish would have been more alive in the film.
Well, that's kind of what I was saying a little bit before. I think I went off my own point about the title having this kind of all-encompassing objective to represent, to suggest that it represents this kind of huge variety of kind of black experience, and it can't possibly. And one of the things that, as you say, misses out on is anger. There isn't this sense of anger towards the system. There's a sense of, as I said, sort of coping and resistance and just kind of
Acceptance.
Doing your best and getting through however you can, which is a different way of doing it, but like it's not, it is something that is just kind of individual to this story, but there is nonetheless there is some variety of, like, it's not just about Tish and Alonzo. It involves the families as well, and actually you get these scenes where they're not even involved at all, and it's about the dads, or it's about the mum going to Puerto Rico to track down the woman and speak to her. I thought that was an interesting scene, because there's something unstated in there, or maybe not even kind of realised at all, about the film was all about kind of racism and systemic injustice against African Americans, but what about the Puerto Rican woman who, still Puerto Rico is not a state, and there are people who want it to be and people who don't want it to be. But like then they had that awful hurricane a couple of years ago, and no help at all, and that sort of thing, and like they're not being looked after. Is it a territory of America?
Yes, it's considered a part of America, but I think it's not a state; it's a territory.
Yeah,
or,
exactly. So like they should be being looked after, basically, and they're not. And obviously,
well, they are American.
Yes. And obviously racism against Hispanic and Latino people is a topic
Yes.
today, in the kind of Trump era as it ever has been. And so it seemed to me there was something kind of unrealised maybe in the film about like a certain commonality that there could have been, or maybe a difference between the mother and the Puerto Rican woman in the kind of way they feel they're treated.
I think I'm not sure if I disagree with you or if we're getting to the same thing from different parts, because I think the film, again, I admire it for doing this, but it also felt too artificial. So, the film is trying to contextualize race within other oppressed groups in America, whilst kind of acknowledging that there are differences amongst them, right? So, you're very blatantly shown that the person who actually does consent to renting them a living space is a Jew, right? Kind of, that's almost the first thing that you see about the landlord, is that he's a Jew, because you see
his cap, you see him from behind, you see his cap on his head.
So, and then of course, and then you have the Puerto Rican, and you have the Diego Luna character, so it's kind of, and yet the Puerto Rican woman is white, right? Which they could have had, a black Puerto Rican, right? So you could see that all of these things have been thought through to make a point, really. And I kind of, I appreciated that kind of very much about the film.
Well, I suppose the point I was kind of getting to about the Puerto Rican woman in particular is that I think it's something that the film could broach, and I don't think it does, but then I'm not sure if I would want it to or not, in a way. I don't know if I would want that to, I don't know if that maybe would bring up something else that would distract from other things the film is doing. I don't know. So I just kind of, I'm bringing it up very kind of vaguely, really.
The film has things...
But it's just something that occurred to me.
The thing has films that it raises and it lets linger. And you always... And that's one of the great things about it, actually. That you always feel there's a backstory and a social context and a history to each of the characters, right? So, for example, the Puerto Rican woman, she went to New York with this guy, and then they had 3 children, and then he left her. And then I had this feeling, well, what happened to her? Was she a prostitute? How is she supporting these 3 kids? She moved to a poor neighborhood, a derelict neighborhood. So, kind of the film suggests all of that, right?
He's a white guy, isn't he, the husband? Doesn't the film say so?
That's right. So
basically, I think the film describes it, or the narration describes it as having pumped 3 kids out of her, and then split.
Yeah. So the film is very good at kind of, just creating characters in a way that suggests a world that they belong. It does so also, with the lady who runs the shop, who comes out to defend them. It does so with the Jewish landlord. It even does so with a white lawyer. Yeah. Kind of, you get their world. You get kind of glimpses into their social relations. I mean, that's quite an achievement, really, to be able to do all of that. So I think the film does a lot about kind of conveying, a multi-layered, complex kind of evocation of structural racism in America. I think it does. The thing that's missing is kind of both anger and pushback. Some political pushback, or
I guess that's just saying I can see why I can see how that is an omission of a sort, but I think it's also something that I didn't miss. I think I just felt maybe it's not necessary in every kind of version of these stories, and I didn't feel like anyone's response to what they were going through was unrealistic. Put it that way. Like, there could have been more anger, but I believed in everyone's response and everyone's kind of way of handling things.
I think there could have been more anger in the main male protagonist. And actually, there was a suggestion in jail he could have let rip. He certainly deserved to. We felt, he would have earned the right to do so. And it was always kind of muted. You felt his pain,
Yeah, what I would have liked to have seen more of is the difference in experience being in jail and being outside of jail, caring for someone in jail are very different things. And being in jail, you do get a sense of things are awful for him in there, and he kind of expresses that to Tish.
Well,
but
sometimes
it's
you
not,
see him with black eyes.
You
and,
see him having been like attacked and in a fight at one point. But you're right that it is too unstated. It's too tamped down. You're right on that.
I'm right on many things. What do you mean you're right on that?
Oh, no, I'm just saying, I think that's a good point. You know, like when I say I believe in everyone, I do. But that is something that could have been better. That he does express anger. Just the one point he kind of lashes out slightly when they're having visitation, and he basically kind of says, "You don't know what it's like in here," but it's a moment. It could have been more. I think you're right about that. The point I was making just before about widows, the commonality, I think there are probably a few, but the one that particularly occurred to me during the film was in the flashback structure, because Widows does something similar with the flashback. Viola Davis's character remembering the life that she had with Liam Neeson and their son. The difference, I suppose, the kind of most concrete difference is that those flashbacks go back a long way. Those go back several years, whereas in this, it's over the past few years up until basically the night of the rape that he wasn't there for, but was jailed over. So there's a way in which these films both handle memory and kind of the way it impacts on who we are today and the way we are today. I think Widows does it more so because in that film, memories are things that linger, whereas in this film, they're kind of the past is very active, like it's still happening now. I don't know, that just kind of slightly occurred to me. Also, what occurred to me was the difference in character between Brian Tyree Henry and this. This is why I said to you in the car on the way back that I think he can play anything. I think he has limitless range, Brian Tyree Henry, because he is so threatening in that film, in Widows, and he is so sympathetic and heartfelt and cuddly in this, and you just want to hug the guy for what he's been through. He can play anything. The guy's amazing.
I think there were some things in the film, or some people in the film, that I thought were just fantastic, actually. So the other people that I want to bring here is Coleman Domingo, who plays the father, who plays Tish's father, you know. And I just thought, in another world, in another country, that man would have been a star, because, you know, when he appears, he's also very magnetic, right? Yeah. Kind of, you know, you're paying attention to everything he does, and he kind of brings a kind of humor and humanity and a kind of a niceness, really. Yeah. And a kind of a niceness within, you know, a knowledge of how the world works, that the world is unfair, and, you know, but a niceness.
It's funny you say that, because I recognise him from The Butler, where he plays the guy who is in charge of all the staff at the White House, and he does, like what you just said, is basically what he does in there. Where he's got a very small role in that film, but it's where
you remembered him.
I do remember him. There are a lot of people in this I recognise from just one thing or something else.
Yes,
and he was one of them. He has this kind of world weariness, sense of humour, but also just a knowledge of everything. Like he's not in charge of the White House staff for nothing, sort of thing. I think it's great. Like the fact that he kind of identify him as bringing the same thing to this is great. I think he's wonderful.
I think he's wonderful. It's a film that I want to see again.
Yeah, so do I.
You know, so that's kind of a compliment. You know, there are things that I'd like to kind of work out better. So, you know, kind of one of the things that we should do maybe is see Moonlight again and then go see this again.
Yeah, that's probably an idea. Who else to bring up? Emily Rios as Victoria Rogers, the woman who was raped.
Yes.
Again, kind of, she has a kind of starring moment. I recognise her again from Breaking Bad, where she plays the girlfriend in that. And actually, the scene that she shares with Regina King, you know, it's a really interesting one. That whole sequence where Regina King goes to Puerto Rico and actually she meets what's his name, Pedro Pascal.
Yes.
Who's
whom I love,
brother or husband of the girl.
And he's very good in this, in a very different way, because normally, like, he's so charismatic and he gives kind of star performances in even minor roles, really, you know, but kind of in this one he's like washed away and, you know, uninvolved, and you know he really kind of manages to create a character out of just like basically like, you know, a scene really.
Well, he's there to try and push her away, isn't he? He's there to try and deny that, because what the girl has gone through is so traumatic that, you know, he wants to protect her from having to relive it, basically, to help Regina King out, and also Regina King's there to get helped out and make her relive it if she has to. And his performance as kind of, he's constantly not looking at her to the point where eventually she says, look me in the eye. And he does, but just for a second. And then he has to look back. And there's so much detail in his facial performance.
Yes.
In that scene, which is beautiful.
Well, I think that whole scene is very beautiful because basically what we see is, we see her go to Puerto Rico. And then when she goes out of the plane, it's almost like it's another world and she's kind of another person. So actually it's not just somebody getting off the plane now. It's like almost like a rich American getting off the plane or something, right? She's dressed differently. She's, you know, she looks elegant and so on. And then there's that whole scene in her hotel room where she's trying to decide whether to put a wig on or not to put a wig on, right? If she puts a wig on, kind of the hair, you know, is less nappy. Right, and so kind of you can see that there's this whole discussion of how she's going to present herself to this other woman.
Yeah.
Right, and actually that has a whole racial dimension. So, you know, is she going to fit into Puerto Rico better, or, you know, or does she kind of highlight the distance? I thought, you know, I'm not sure I
found that scene really hard to read.
Right,
and I think I think there's so much about. This will sound incredibly ignorant, but there's so much around black people and black people's hair that I just don't understand. And, you know, I know that you're not allowed to touch it. But black women get really sick of that. People go, "No, I love your hair," and just touching it immediately. Like, I don't know why people... That's just awful. I don't know why people would do that. But I know there's a whole kind of culture around it. I remember when I saw Creed, and then I was reading about the scene in which... I forget the character's name, but the guy and the girl are on the beds and they're chatting, and he's just kind of braiding her hair absent-mindedly, and I didn't really pay any particular attention to that, but I saw this whole article which was about how wonderful that scene was, about how important that is in kind of black culture, and that she pays attention to her hair and this sort of thing. And I thought, well, there's so much here that I just don't understand, and I'm not sure that I ever will. And I think it's kind of going on in this scene as well. There's a long time taken over putting her hair up into the hairnet to keep it in place, and then putting the wig on, then deciding that it's not right and taking it back off.
But then when you see her with a wig.
Yeah.
So
it's come back on.
There's that whole discussion of self-presentation, and you know, self-presentation in a culture where she is now another as well. Right, and she's treated differently, like just, you know, kind of. I mean, initially when she walks into the restaurant, there's someone who comes and talks to her, and I'm thinking, is this going to be something about her not being allowed in, or, you know? And then but then she's led through the restaurant, right? And, you know, and then again you think, oh, are they taking her to the back? Like, you have all these paradigms of reading these things, right? That you have to kind of readjust as you're watching it, really. You know, so I thought all of that was reverberated. There's stuff there, you know, kind of.
The similar thing I think was going on, although it's maybe a bit more obvious, in the scene where Tish is harassed by the guy in the grocery store, and Alonzo throws him out, and then the cop shows up, because you kind of go like at first you have the thing of, she can't. The guy who's harassing her is white. I think he might be like Italian American, but he's white, and so that there's a difference there that she really has no power to kind of come back him. She's a woman and she's black, and that's just two places below, you know. And then when he throws the guy out into the streets, and like before the cop shows up, I know that a cop is going to show up and see that. Like, I know that all of a sudden it's going to look different from a different angle.
Yeah, that's a very beautiful moment. And actually, as I said, that is, you know, one of the ideas that Baldwin constantly mined, you know, which was about black masculinity, you know, because on the one hand, you know, it's what America's afraid of, you know, on the other hand, you know, this argument that, you know, black men aren't allowed to be men, in quotation marks, in a society that's structurally racist and will not prevent them from doing that. So, then again, when she puts her body over his to protect him. So, I thought that was all, and then that it's the old lady, right, who comes and rescues both of them, right? Because also, I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I thought, well, she's probably a first-generation immigrant who was kind of, kicked out of some shtetl in Czechoslovakia or something. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
Yeah, that, you get the sense of these are people who've kind of known oppression and who've had a hard time. Yeah, and who are aware of these differences and how they can turn,
Yeah. Well, it also reminded me of that scene of the end of Get Out. Well, I think Get Out did it more successfully, and I suppose spoilers for the end of Get Out. But at the very, very end, when he gets out and he's being chased down by the girl, I forget exactly how it goes, but hasn't he shot her with a shotgun, basically? Where he's standing there with a shotgun and she's on the ground bleeding. And then you hear sirens. You hear police sirens. And I remember watching that and my heart just tightening, like, oh God. Because all of a sudden, this kind of very weird horror movie has turned into something completely real, where you go, this is going to look fucking awful from the cop's point of view. And then, of course, the film lets you up, and actually it turns out that it's his friend who has come to rescue him. So, it lets you away with that. But I think it has a similar thing. I think it worked a lot better in Get Out. But whereas in here it's kind of, I suppose it's a little bit more signposted anyway, because you know that something has to have happened to put Alonso in this position. As it is, it's this kind of one. It's in this film, it's the one time that you had to get on the wrong side of just the wrong cop for him to ruin your life, and that's as easy as it is. Anyway.
All right. Well, as we said, we I have more problems with the film than Mike does. However, we both think that it's kind of good enough to revisit, right? So, which happens very rarely. I mean, it's maybe only about 5 times a year that we think, oh, this film is so great that we're going to, see it again. So,
I think it's a really, really great film. And the second time, I shall be bearing all of your reservations in mind.
Well, thank you.
And I'll probably like it more just to spite you.
Well, I hope I like it more. That's
there were
the
times
intent.
that I wanted to cry. Really, I felt. I can't underestimate, can't overestimate, can't misestimate what I think is a really, really rich depth of feeling in there.
I agree, and I kind of, I was, what's the word? Not on the verge of tears or something, but like kind of where you're getting almost a bit wet.
Yeah,
like kind
welling
of,
up.
Well, you're just feeling it without actually it having a physical manifestation, but you're on the verge of it. And actually, I think the film sustains that tone almost throughout. With me, like I was very moved by it all.
And it finds real beauty in places where I remember the one shot which really struck me, which was again of a face. I think he films faces so beautifully, which is in that scene where they're playing at what their home will look like once they've kitted it out. And there's light coming through these huge windows in what is basically a warehouse. This place, and they're playing at picking up a fridge or whatever, and then you see Tish against the window, and light is streaming through against her hair, and it lights her just in the right way, and she says, "Oh, okay, thank you for the fridge, but now go and pick up the stove."
Yes.
And oh God, it's just such a beautiful, beautiful image, and it comes from nowhere.
Yes. Yes, I mean, yeah,
it's worth it for its own sake, I think.
Yeah, that was all a pleasure to see, and actually, I also loved all the clothes, right? Because you see these people kind of looking really beautiful, all in different ways, and actually not like Vogue beautiful or fetish beautiful. It's almost like the beauty of ordinary people, really. Yeah, I mean, obviously, this has some fantastically good-looking people. But also you see that, it's what you were saying about faces. He finds the beauty in people, and in some scenes, Tish looked like a goddess, right? And in others, she looked like a shy teenager, right? And kind of, but kind of, it's a very visually beautiful film.
Yes, it is. astonishingly beautiful. And actually, I wish it had been projected on celluloid. It's the first time I've thought this in ages. But it was projected digitally, and it looked very beautiful and crisp. But you can tell that had it been projected on celluloid, the darkness in the shadows and the blacks would have been even richer. Like the thing is, when you project digitally, even black kind of shows up, it lights a little bit, and that was kind of disappointing. All I remember is when I saw Seven, the David Fincher film, when it was projected on film. They brought back a bunch of films at Cineworld a couple of years ago, and I saw Seven, and projected on celluloid, it was incredible because it's basically pitch black the whole way through.
Yeah,
and the kind of
beautiful.
contrast is incredible. Had this been shown that way, it would have been even more beautiful to look at, and it's kind of a shame that it wasn't. It was just the slightest bit sort of hazy when it needed to have been, I think. But that's the problem with the projection than the way it's
that's also really
filmed.
nitpicking, my God.
Of course it's nitpicking, but actually the film is so beautiful that made me think of that.
No, that's good.
Made me think of that nitpick.
That's very good.
So there you go.
All right.
So yeah, no, it's really, really good. And I'm looking forward to seeing it a second time. And,
Yes.
and we'll watch Moonlight in the meantime because we should revisit. When's the last time you saw it?
Not for a while, maybe a year or two.
Yeah.
Since when it came out, I saw it several times, maybe 3 in fact, but not since then.
Yeah. Okay.
So
we'll revisit that as well.
Okay.
Lovely.
Righto. This is Eavesdropping on the Movies. Thank you very much for listening. We are on
iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.